Begin as usual by saying tonight's shiur is Le'ilu Nishmat Avi Mori Dov Ber Meir Ben Reuven Halevi Imi Maroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and refuah shlema to all those from who are still in Beit Cholim from this morning's pigua, and all of Cholei Am Yisrael. So tonight we are talking about parshat Toldot, as to be expected. But let's get that up on the screen here. Okay. And I really want to focus on, of course, even though the parsha begins with Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham Olidet Yitzchak, Yitzchak is not really the central character of this week's parsha, or any parsha for that matter, except the first, there's one story where Yitzchak is the central character. That's not what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to focus tonight on Eisav and Yaakov and the beginning of the parsha. If I can get my mouse going properly here and find out where we need to be, we will get started. Okay. First, just as I said, beginning of the parsha, very straightforward. I think, or as I said, as with most of the parashot in Bereshit, more so than the rest, we are very familiar with the storyline. These are the Toldot of Yitzchak ben Avram. Avram is the one who gives birth to Yitzchak. Yitzchak is 40, marries Rivka, and she has no kids. 10 years go by, 15 years go by. They're waiting for kids. They're davening to Hashem very much. Finally, Hashem hears their tefillot, and Rivka becomes pregnant. Now, this is one of those few pregnancies in the Torah that we are actually given some information about. Many times in the Torah, it says she became pregnant, she had a baby. We're going to see that in Parshat Vayetze. We see that very frequently with Yaakov's wives. They become pregnant, they have a baby, and there's nothing discussed in the Torah about the pregnancy other than it happened. As I said, this is the exception where we actually have a discussion of the pregnancy, because it appears that Rivka is going through a very challenging pregnancy. As the pasuk tells us in Chafbet, "Vayirotetzu habanim b'kirba." Now, the word "vayirotetzu" from the word larutz, the Parshanim try to figure out what it means, but it basically means that, it's interesting because it says habanim. Here it already tells us the Torah, the narrator of the Torah, who gives us information that apparently Rivka did not have. Rivka does not know that she is carrying more than one child. We are told right away, there are banim b'kirba in her midst. And that is why she seems to be having this very terrible and challenging pregnancy. She says to the effect, Lama zanochi, why am I going through such a seemingly challenging pregnancy? Now, this is one of the psukim that is very, very, very interesting at best, strange, seemingly strange, because here she is married to Yitzchak. Her father-in-law is Avram Avinu. One would have thought the first people she would have asked is immediate family. Why go anywhere else? But it says, et Hashem. She goes to ask Hashem. Rashi tells us that she goes not to Avram, not to Yitzchak, but she goes. Whoever's out there, please mute, because I'm getting an echo back. So if you can all please put yourself on mute. I hope that'll work. Okay. No, it doesn't seem to be working. Yeah, I can. Okay. All right. Now let's get back to where we were. Okay. So the Parshanim, or at least try to tell us that the reason she goes to somebody other than Avram and Yitzchak is because she is concerned. And the pasuk is interesting because the psukim before tells us that Rivka bat B'Suel, she's concerned that she is being punished for something that she has done and doesn't really want to discuss this with her immediate family, perhaps. That's one school of thought says that. The other school of thought says that, again, that she's afraid of Yitzchak. And if we look through all of the stories of Yitzchak and Rivka, not that she's afraid, she's in awe of him. She does not have, it seems that there's almost, and I think we talked about this a little bit last year, that there's a little bit of missing communication, whereas with Avraham and Sarah, we seem to have open communications. With Yitzchak and Rivka, it seems a little bit less open. And we see that most particularly in the story where Yitzchak calls Eisav in to get a bracha, and Rivka overhears, and there's a whole, rather than confronting Yitzchak, she almost seems to go around his back, if you will. Okay? But here again, she goes and asks, and now she finds out. So the first question that I always ask when I read this parsha is, okay, Rivka has this information that she's going to have twins, and that these twins are going to be from the get-go. They're going to be completely different temperaments, personalities, children. And the question is, does she share this information with anybody? I'm not going to answer that. I'm just going to leave it as a question, okay? Pregnancy complete, she goes to full term, and interestingly enough here, this is a very strange place. Now, we, the readers, were just told there were going to be twins. Why does it say Vinay? All of a sudden, wow, there were twins. Now, Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch on the word Vihinei tells us very, very interesting. Now, if I were to take a poll of 1,000 people who've studied the story of the birth of Yitzchak, of Yaakov and Eisav, ask them, were Yaakov and Eisav identical twins or fraternal twins? What would you say? Fraternal, right? Everybody's going to say they're fraternal twins, right? Because one is going to be very hairy, the other is going to be. And the answer is, Rav Samson says that's the Vihinei. The strange thing is, because if you're told the two boys are going to be completely different from the get-go, you would assume they'll be fraternal twins. The Vihinei is they were identical twins. That's Rav Hirsch. That just Rav Samson Hirsch says, and that the Torah is trying to emphasize the fact that these two, even though they're going to be diametrically opposed, come from the same exact biological source, which is a very, very interesting thought. And I think it's one of the primary themes of the book of Bereshit, to focus us on the fact that Hashem, when he looks at us based on who we become, not who we are born as. And we see that throughout Sefer Bereshit, whether it's Cain and Hevel, Menashe and Ephraim at the beginning, Menashe and Ephraim at the end. We often find brothers in a situation where we are going through this tension between older sibling and younger sibling, and often we're going to see it with Yaakov and Eisav. We're going to see it. We saw with Yitzchak and Yishmael, where the older, even though we might have thought the older should be the one who gets certain privileges, as the older, it gets transferred to the younger. Yes.
The old argument of nurture versus nature.
Nurture versus nature.
Have the same nature and the same nurture.
Exactly.
What is the
that's a good question. We're going to get to that in another few psukim in a minute. But the fact is, and that is exactly the point of the book of Bereshit, I think, at least one of the points, certainly, I'm not going to say this is the only point, but one of the critical themes that runs through Bereshit is that Hashem selects us based on character and what we can and have accomplished. Why is Avram chosen rather than Nahor, Haran, anybody else? Because of who he is, not how he's born, not his birth order, not his genealogy. The same thing perhaps with Shem. There's a machloket among Parshanim. Is Shem the oldest of Noach's sons or not? Again, this whole concept it's a recurring theme in Book of Bereshit: older son, younger son, who gets picked and who doesn't get picked. More often, it's who doesn't get picked, and that's going to play itself out very, very clearly, perhaps no more clearly than in the story of Yaakov and Eisav. But again, that's why I say Rav Hirsch says this this whole concept of Vinei Tomim, the Vitna, is exactly that. They were identical twins, but clearly they grow up very differently. Okay. We know Eisav comes out Admoni, Kulo Kaderet Seyar. He is fully developed, full of hair, and everybody calls his name Eisav. And then his brother comes out. He's holding on to Esav's heel, of course, and he gets called Yaakov, and Yitzchak is 60 when they are born. Okay. So we're told a little bit about the birth. By the way, it's interesting because the assumption that we have is the guess is that Eisav is this fully developed child, whereas Yaakov is not. Interestingly enough, if you go through the medical studies of identical twins, you will find cases where, because of abnormalities in the birth in the womb, that one can get more and become more developed than another, even though they're identical twins. And it's only after they grow that you might start to begin to see that. Others, of course, you have a much more natural progression, but it does happen. I know of cases where it happens where two identical twins were born. One was significantly more developed than the other. Okay, and that seems to be the case here.
Admoni here doesn't necessarily mean red-headed. It means grudgy.
Admoni, it's interestingly enough because Admoni, that's one of those words, does not appear a whole lot of times in Tanakh. Who else is called Admoni in Tanakh? David HaMelech. Okay, is the only other one I believe was called Admoni. And again, what does that mean? It could be Admoni, could be he was a Gingy. But again, if he was a Gingy, then Yaakov would have been a Gingy too. Okay, so if we go to Rav Hirsch and they say they're identical twins, but Admoni, I think at least the Gemara's perspective is Admoni is much more of a temperament, born under a certain sign. And the Gemara says if you're going to be an Admoni, you should go out and practice. Either go get a job as a Moel or as a Shochet, because Admoni means you're going to be somebody who has a natural tendency to be a shedder of blood. I don't know. I mean, presumably, if Eisav was an Admoni from that perspective, then Yaakov would have been an Admoni too, according to Hirsch's theory. But Yaakov is not. It doesn't say Yaakov wasn't an Admoni. Okay, it's interesting enough. It doesn't say that he wasn't. What was the dominant feature about Eisav was the seyar, the hairiness. So maybe Admoni means hairy. I don't know.
Why would
Why would Yaakov have a need for putting something on? Well, Yaakov himself says, I'm not Admo. I'm not Anuchi Ish Chalak. He had very smooth skin. He was not a hairy guy. He himself says that to his mother. So clearly, to something, as I said, and this perhaps might be a problem with Hirsch's theory, because if one was hairy, the other was. But as I said, if one, because again, after they split in the womb, one of them happened to be was closer to the source of the food, and the other was not, and they became much more developed, that could entirely possibly account for that. On the other hand, as I said, just because if they're identical twins and one of them had a gene for hair, the other one has to have it. They can't have. I can't say they had a different gene unless the mutation happened after the split, which I don't know what the studies are on identical twins having a mutation in the gene after they split. Don't know. Have not looked into the literature on that one, but it may be something worth looking into. Don't know. Okay, but it's that. So you asked about nurture versus nature. Okay, so the next pasuk immediately after we're told of their birth, immediately we don't know anything about their elementary school years. Because all it says is Vayidalu an Arim in the next pasuk. They've already grown up. Now, the commentaries on this pasuk Vayidalu an Arim say there's where the problem starts. Okay, Vayidalu an Arim seems to imply that they were raised together. They were raised given the exact same chinuch. And we know one of the first things we're told when we're in the chinuch business is a pasuk Mishlech Hanoch Lanar Al Pidarko, that you as a educator, as an educator, you have to be able to look at the temperament of the individual being educated to understand how do you reach them. So, for example, if one is very artistic and one is very concrete, you've got to give two completely different approaches in your schooling. However, having said that, it appears that, and Rashi himself says, I think I brought the Rashi down here in a minute. Let me go get to the Rashi here. On the Pasuk by Dalu on the Arim, he says, oh no, it's not. That's let's go back up to Rashi. Rashi says very interesting. No, it doesn't Rashi. Why? It's not Rashi. It's not. It's hold on a minute. I got to remember who it is. 1 minute. Okay, I didn't bring it down here. Oh, here we go. Here's the Rashi. Here's the part I'm looking for. Oh, Vayikvashmo and Vayikrushmo. All right, well, again, I just want to quote this one Rashi here, where Rashi says it's very simple. As long as they were growing in the formative years, nobody looked at them to see was there a difference between them, and nobody looked at what their intrinsic nature was. And it's only once they become bar mitzvahs, one says, okay, I'm bar mitzvah, I'm finished with Judaism. Another says, no, I'm starting with Judaism. That seems to be the difference. Okay. It's interesting because Rashi very simply says that when it comes to giving the name, Vayikre'u Shemo Eisav, everybody called his name Eisav because of the fact that he was fully grown, hairy. That Eisav seems to be from the word asu. He was made already. Whereas Vayikra Shmo Yaakov, Parshanim go two completely different ways on this. One say Vayikra was clearly who was the one who the Vayikra was. Vayikru is, it seems that whoever, maybe it's both parents plus the midwife plus whoever happened to be there. I don't know who else was there. I can't imagine there were a whole lot of people in the room when they're being born. Presumably there was a midwife and presumably there was Rivka. I don't even know if Yitzchak was there. But at the time they were given names, everybody called him Eisav. Whereas with Yaakov, as I said, one school of thought says Yitzchak specifically calls him Yaakov because of the cave Eisav. But there's another midrash that says Vayikra Shmo Yaakov is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one who gives him the name Yaakov. And the midrash there says it's a very interesting midrash that says you Yitzchak Rivka gave a name to your bechor. I HaKadosh Baruch Hu am now going to give a name to my bechor. Okay, which is a very interesting way of looking at this pasuk Vayikra Shmo Yaakov. Changes his name to Yisrael. Okay. Also, but if we think about it, who is it who gives Yitzchak his name? Okay, Kadosh Baruch Hu. None other than Kadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not unprecedented for Kadosh Baruch Hu to give a name. Okay, and Yishmael as well. Again, but he doesn't. Nobody suggests that Kadosh Baruch Hu is one who gives him the name Eisav. Okay, because it doesn't say Vayikra Shmo Eisav. It says Vayikre'u. Okay. No, Adam gives Chava his name. Hashem doesn't give Chava. Adam is the one who gives Chava her name. Okay. And I'm not sure who gives Adam his name. I have to go back and think about it. I think Adam gives himself his name. Kimi Adama, because it's related to the Adama, I think. I have to go back and look at the psukim there. Okay. Okay. Now, so they grow up, and it tells us a very, very interesting fact about Yaakov and Eisav. It says, "Vayi Eisav, ish yodeat sayid ish sadeh." So he's not an ish sayid; he's an ish yodeat sayid, which is a very, very unique construction, because an ish sayid would very clearly be a hunter. An ish sadeh, on the other hand, we would say, wait a minute, a man of the field. We would think he was an agronomist, but the answer is no, because if we look back in the Torah, we find previous agronomists are either described as ish ha'adamah, in the case of Noah, ish ha'adamah, or in the case of Cain, oved adamah. Okay, so in either of those cases, there's a connection is to the adamah, not to the sadeh. And so the Parshanim want to tell us that this sadeh, the ish sadeh, is really not what we think it is. It's a man who is out in the field hunting, but not necessarily hunting animals. Even though later on we're going to say that Yitzchak loves Eisav kitzayid b'fiv, the Parshanim want to tell us that when it says ish yodei tzayid, that he was a man who knew how to hunt, it means he knew how to hunt people, specifically female people. That's what one midrash wants to say, that his, I guess, specialty was seducing young females who were out for a walk. Yes, Ish Sadeh, that's what I would have thought Ish Sadeh as a farmer, but that's what I say. The Torah in other cases of farming has used Ish Ha'adamah rather than Ish Sadeh. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not, but it's when you put it together with Ish Yodei Tzayid, Ish Sadeh doesn't fit. Because Ish Yodei Tzayid means somebody who is knowledgeable in hunting. Okay, now there's another parsha, and I forgot who. Again, I apologize. I didn't have enough time this week to get everybody lined up. But Yodei Tzayid, one wants to say, no, he was not that he was hunting women. He was plain and simple a hunter, fox hunter, like we have in England. You know that, to tell you how, and away we go. Okay, in other words, he was a man of leisure who didn't have to go work for a living, and so he went out and hunted for sport, exactly. And that's why he was. And there, Ish Sadeh fits, because where do you hunt for sport? Out in the fields. Okay, it's a field sport. So there, again, that's another school of thought. One tells Ish Sadeh, not that he was a hunter for game hunter for food, but he was a sport hunter. Okay, which is again a different type of approach to trying to understand this pasuk. Yes, Gary.
Well, obviously, the wealth of those days had to.
Okay.
The enemies of those who prey on.
Yes.
Who would just decimate the herd.
Mm-hmm.
So on the other hand, he could have been actually working on hunting to eliminate those animals of prey on the wealth.
Certainly a possible explanation that Gershon wants to suggest that he's hunting to protect the flocks, and that because the flocks basically represent the wealth, and that's a perfectly legitimate way of looking at it, and maybe that is the right way to look at it. Again, I'm just there are different ways the Parshanim want to look at this phrase of Ish Yodei Tzayid Ish Sadeh. And interestingly enough, we then get, of course, to the second half. It says Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim. Now the question, and there's another question the Parshanim wrestle with: is Ish Yodei Tzayid Ish Sadeh two descriptive terms or one descriptive term? Ishtam Yoshev Olim, is that one descriptive term or two descriptive terms? And are they looking at two different factors? Are they looking at one? Are the two meant to show us this the totally, completely different ways they approached life? And I think the answer to that one seems to be pretty clear. The Torah is right away setting up the fact that these two, the Torah's already told us in the Nevuah that they're going to be two completely different temperaments, outlooks on life, personalities, everything that you could possibly imagine about these two is going to be different. Gershon.
In his small manufacturing company, one guy is the inside guy who operates the factory, the other is out there marketing and dealing with customers.
Now, there's no question that you need to be successful in a business or in a large enterprise. You need lots of different talents. There's no question about it. To run a country, to run a government, you need lots of different talents. No question about it. And interesting enough, if we go later on, when these two are grown and Yitzchak is trying to figure out, okay, how do I divvy up the jobs going forward? If you look at the two brachot that he gives to them, you look at the bracha he gives to Yaakov when he thinks he's Eisav, versus the bracha that he gives to Yaakov when he knows he's Yaakov, they are two very different brachot. One is material prosperity, rulership. The other is you're going to inherit, you will be the one who will inherit the covenant, the spiritual. Okay, so clearly Yitzchak, everybody says, well, Yitzchak didn't really understand Eisav. He did. Yitzchak's vision is that Eisav and Yaakov are going to work together exactly the way you said it. Eisav is going to run the government, the military, the businesses. Yaakov's going to sit and run the Beit Midrash and the yeshiva and make sure that the spiritual values and are nurtured and grow. Rivka says, don't work. I mean, Rivka, you have to understand, Yitzchak and Rivka are coming from two completely different backgrounds. Okay? And the Torah emphasizes that right in the beginning of the parsha. Yitzchak is Ben Avram. He grew up in the household of Avram and Sarah. He knows only one way of doing this, straight yashar. It's straight. Okay? Rivka grows up with Lavan, Betuel, in a household where, who knows what's happening. Okay? So she is probably much more, I would say much more worldly, and Yitzchak is much more otherworldly. Okay, you think of Yitzchak as, his father's ready to bring him as a korban, and what does he do? He says to his father, make sure if you're going to bring me as a korban that you get it right. Time me up so I can't invalidate the korban. That's not everybody's everyday thinking. This is not an ordinary person that we're dealing with. We're dealing with somebody who's on a very, very different level. Although, interestingly enough, when we get to the story immediately after the story of Yaakov and Eisav and the bechora, we have this whole story of Yitzchak and Plishtim, and he's planting and he's growing and he's digging wells, and he's going through all of this gashmiut stuff, which really has a very, very spiritual underlying message, both to his generation and, of course, to all of us who are reading about it. And that's the way we really visualize Yitzchak, as somebody who's focused primarily on the spiritual, not necessarily on the physical. And yet, even he is going on, digging wells, has flocks, although he's the only one of the patriarchs who is described as actually planting and growing. The others are, as the brothers say when they get to Yosef, no, we're shepherds. It's been the family business for generations. We're not farmers who grow wheat. We are ranchers. We're cattle ranchers. We're sheep ranchers. That's been our profession. And it's clearly from Yaakov, clearly from Avraham, and Yitzchak, we don't see the same connection. Although I guess if you think about the wells, why does he need water? He's not irrigating land. He needs the water to water for the flocks. Okay, so it seems very clear. Now let's get to Yaakov Ishtam Moshe V'Olim. Interestingly enough, there is nobody else in the entire Tanakh who is described as Ish Sadeh. Okay, let's put that on the table right away. Ish Sadeh does not appear anywhere else in the Tanakh. That phrase. Ish Tam appears one other time in Tanakh. Anybody want to guess who the other Ish Tam, who the other person was described as Ish Tam, not Tamim, because we know Noach is described as Tadik Tamim, and Avram is told Hitalech l'fanai ve'yet Tamim. But there's only one other personage in Tanakh who is described as Ish Tam. Okay, since nobody else. Well, I'm sorry.
Moshe?
No, not Moshe. No, not Eliyahu. I don't think Eliyahu would ever describe as Ish Tam. He's a very, very complex man. Now, it's interestingly, before I give you the answer, I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. But if I ask most people, and I take the word tam out of the context of the word ish before it, what does the word tam mean? Simple. Gershon says simple. Where do you get that from? Ish tam? No, ish tam. We get the word tam because we happen to have in our passage called the Arba Banim in the Haggadah, the third son is called Tam. And the Tam only asks Mazot. So we give this impression that Tam means simple, right? Now, was Yaakov a simple man? Maybe in some ways he was, but I don't think that's the definition of Ish Tam here. I just want to put that in the wholesome is very, but it's interesting because normally the word wholesome, what you're saying wholesome, the Torah word for that is Tamim. Okay, Noach is Ish Sadik Tamim Haya B'Dorotav. Tamim Tiyeh Im Hashem Elokecha. So we have Tamim appears in a new number of different settings describing a personal characteristic. The word Tam never does, except it says one other example, and we're going to go to him because that's going to give us a little insight into what Ish Tam is. Now, that one I did remember to bring down here, and it is, of course, none other than Eov. Okay? Ish Haya Be'eretz Utz, the first chapter of Eov. Ish Haya Be'eretz Utz, Eov Shemo. There was this man. We have no idea what time frame he lived in. We have no idea whether he really lived or he's a mashal or a parable. We don't know whether he was Jewish, whether we don't know anything about him except that his name was Eov. That's all we know about him here. But Haya Ishahu, he was Tam, but V'yashar V'yirei Elokim V'sar Meirah. That phrase appears not only describing him as whoever's writing the book describing him, but Hashem talks to the Satan and uses the exact same phrase 7 later. Ki ein kamohu ba'aretz, there's nobody like him in the land. Ish tam v'yashar v'yirei Elokim v'sar meirah. Now, based on that, as I said, it's the only other place Ish tam appears in Tanakh. We get the impression that Yaakov is not Tam in the Haggadah context of Tam, but Tam in much more along the line of Tamim. That he is Tam, he is Yashar, he's Yirei Elokim, and he is Sar Meirah. So we have to straightforward.
As opposed to someone who's a hunter.
Exactly. Thank you, David. Very well said. Exactly. Ish Yodea Tzayid, according to many of the parshanim, is the opposite of Ish Tam. A Yodea Tzayid is somebody who has to take lots of things into consideration and be able to maneuver around other people and their needs. Devious, perhaps, but not necessarily devious. More, I would say, more cunning, perhaps. Clever, cunning, but able to manipulate information and circumstances. Whereas in Ish Tam is there's a straightforward shot. What you see is what you get, open. As opposed to a lot of stuff is behind, close to the vest. You keep everything close to the vest when you're a Ish Yodei Tzayid, because you don't want everybody to know what you're thinking, what you're working on. Whereas Ish Tam, everything is out in the open. Now, then we get to Yoshev Ohalim versus Ish Sadeh, if we're going to look at it, those two, and compare and contrast that way. So Yoshev Ohalim, interesting enough, we all know Rashi says, what does Rashi say for Yoshev Ohalim? He says, Alo shel Shem, Alo shel Aver. He sat in the tent of Shem and tent of Aver, the two, quote, Gedolei Hador, I guess, although it's interesting. Now, I don't remember if I brought this one down either, but where is it? Now, this is Rashi. This Koni. Where was it? Was it? Here we go. No, no. Here we go. Okay, Rakanti. In 13th, 14th century, writes the following. Post Rashi says, Yoshev Ohalim, Yoshev ben Ohel Avraham v'Ohel Yitzchak u'mekabel mishneim. I didn't bring this, but I thought that to me would make a lot more sense. What did he do? He sat at his father's feet, his grandfather's feet, and he sat and learned, and he taught everything they had to teach him about God, about Judaism, it wasn't called Judaism back then, but about monotheism and about what does God expect from us. I think that if you're going to say Yoshev Ohalim means sitting in yeshiva, I would have picked the yeshiva of Avram and Yitzchak rather than the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. No slouches Shem and Aver, but I would have said yeshiva of Avram and Yitzchak seems to me to be a lot more powerful place to be learning. But again, Yoshev Ohalim could also mean, to go back to Gershon's comment about Ish Sadeh and how he was protecting the flock, Yoshev Ohalim, we know that where do ranchers, shepherds spend the whole flock, the whole summer season? They spend it out in tents to protect themselves from the shade while they're out with the flocks. Because the flocks don't necessarily come back every day back to civilization, to a city. They're more out in the field grazing and moving along. So Yoshev Ohalim could also mean that he was a shepherd, as we find also in Bereshit, whereas one of Lemech's sons is described as Yoshev Ohel Umikneh. He was one who dwelt in tents and was a rancher, was a cattle, a sheep herder. So again, Yoshev Ishtam, Yoshev Olim could also refer to profession, and as well as I said, the Midrashic interpretation that he was sitting and learning all day. But either way, the description we have of each of these brothers seems to belie and to be diametrically opposed to what we're going to read about in verse beginning in this the first story we're going to read about them. Okay, we're told parenthetically, Yaakov. We're already told about the fact that Yitzchak and Rivka each have their own way of looking at the relationship between the two sons. And as I said, that pasuk really doesn't belong here. It really belongs later on. But it's interesting that the Torah inserts it here because it's just giving us the whole background. Okay, so now we get to the story, again, well-known story of this Adom, this stuff, this Nazir Adashim, that Yaakov is preparing. He's preparing some type of dish. And Eisav comes in from the field. He's exhausted. What Ayef means, the Midrashim tell us that he was busy because he had done all these wonderful Aveirot. But Ayef means, again, he was a hunter. He had just chased down, whoever, whatever, some deer for who knows how many miles till he finally caught up with him. So he was a little exhausted. And he's hungry, presumably. He hasn't eaten all day, whatever. And ate some. But by the way, the fact that he was coming in from the field after, presumably, again, we don't know. What was he doing out in the field? We don't know. We know he was an Ish Sadeh. Each of those interpretations, I can tell you what he was doing. Well, if he was the sport hunter, he was tired because he just had a good day of sport. Forgot to bring the refreshments, I guess. If he was a hunting for food, and we say, why was he a yef? Well, he was tired. But why does he have to go to Yaakov? Why couldn't he make his own food? Why didn't he make some food when he caught the game? Maybe he didn't catch anything that day. Don't know. And if Hasadeh means that he was out, as Gershon once says, he was out watching the flocks, he would have been tired after a hard day's work. So each of these will fit the story based on what we have. But we know, of course, that he says, okay, give me some of this stuff. Now, it's interesting because he gets the name Edom from the fact that he doesn't refer to the food by what it is, he refers to it by its color. He simply says, give me some of this red stuff. And that's why he gets this name, red. Now, I might have thought, going back to Admoni, the fact that if he was a Gingy, he would have probably been called red anyway, or something along those lines. But the fact is he gets the name Adom from the color of the food being cooked, because that's the way he refers to it. All right, now then we come to the... Yeah.
But then this is sort of like,
this is very appropriate. Yeah, it's possible. Again, Al-Kain Karashmo could be, that's why they called his name, or because of this, they called his name. Either way, it works either way. So Yaakov says the following, and this is the passage that really seems to be the most interesting of the whole parsha. Sell me chayom. I'm not going to translate that for another minute. Et bechorat chali, your bechora to me. So the first question we have to understand and we have to ask is, what is Yaakov looking to buy? Okay. The second question is, what is the word chayom? Why does he say chayom? If you were looking to purchase something, why would you say like the day? You would say, hayom, I want to buy it. I'm interested in buying this. Right now, I want to buy it. Why does he say chayom? Okay. And those are two questions I want to ask. And Eisav says, well, I'm going to die from whatever it is. And lama zeli bechora, what good is it to me if I don't live long enough to enjoy it, for whatever it is? We don't know what he means by that. Yaakov says, swear to me, again, chayom, like today, by Yishavalo, he swears to him, and Mikort Bechor told Yaakov, and he agrees to the sale. Now, then we have verse 34. After this sale is over, he's agreed to the sale. Yaakov gives Eisav a meal. He gives him something to eat. And it's interesting, Vayochal, Vayesh, Vayakam, Vayelach. 4 very quick verbs. He eats, he drinks, he gets up, he leaves. Very, very terse, sharp description in the Torah. And then Vayivez Eisav et HaBechora. Now, there's only one other time in the entire Tanakh the word Vayivez appears. Only one other time in Tanakh. Any guesses? in the Megillah, exactly. Haman HaRasha, it says, Vayivez beinav lishlach yad Mordechai levado. Vayivez means it was not despised. I don't think it was despised. It was beneath his dignity. It was so, the bechora was just something that was so, I don't want to say, it wasn't disgusting, because Vayivez doesn't really mean disgusting. That would be Aishaketz. But it was something that was, who needs it? And so the question now we have to go back is, having all read all this, what is the bechora? What does it mean, the bechora? And if we all think about it, well, first thing we think about is the bechora means, we know that the bechor in halachic inheritance, the bechor gets pishnayim. Bechor gets a double portion of the inheritance as though he were two brothers. So if there are two brothers, instead of each getting half, the older one gets, it's as though there were three, the older one gets 2/3, the younger one gets 1/3. If there are three brothers, then the older one gets 2/4, and the other two each get 1/4. But clearly, Eisav, if we've just characterized Yaakov as Ishtam, Yoshevo Ali, and he's this simple guy, doesn't need a whole lot of stuff. He's a really, he's the yeshiva guy who's perfectly happy to live on nothing as long as he's got food to eat. And we're going to see later on, what does he ask Hashem when he's running away to Lavan? Give me food, clothing, shelter. I'm good to go. That's all I need. Whereas Eisav, we have this impression that Eisav is this, I want, I need, I must have. He's the guy who we would characterize as, I need everything in life. I want it all. So why would he be willing to sell for nothing? Well, by the way, we don't know what he sold it for. It doesn't say anywhere here what the price was. Now, our assumption is, the assumption of many reading the story at face value, is the purchase price was the food. That doesn't seem to be the case. There is no mention of what the purchase price was, or whether there even was a purchase price. All we know is that Yaakov gives him food afterwards, and many of the Parshanim want to say that has nothing to do with the purchase. That was just the meal to seal the purchase, to conclude it. As we find out, as we saw 2 weeks ago with Avram and Avimelech, when they make a brit, they serve a meal. With Yitzchak later on in the parsha, where it discussed that before he sends Avimelech on his way, again, they make a meal, they make a party. So there are parshat even want to suggest that what Yaakov gave to Eisav, that we all, as kids, we always learned, he sold the birthright for a bowl of porridge, for a bowl of lentil stew, whatever it was. Seems to be, many of the parshat seem to say that's absolutely not true. The meal was simply the meal that he sat down and served him to seal, to show that the deal was final. Because if you'll read it, it says by he sold it before it, and it nowhere mentions the price. Now, let's get back to two words in the first Yaakov's request. Again, the key word of this is bechora. What does the bechora really represent? And what does the word kayom represent? Well, what does kayom mean? So I want to make this is something I did not find in the Parshanim, but I'm going to suggest the following. That firstly, the deal here is that we are living, first we have to understand that this event happens in a time where the privilege of representing the family as the spiritual representative of the family was something that was up for bids. I don't want to say bids, that's not the right word, but was not necessarily given to any specific individual in the family. Anyone could aspire to that. Rambam, if you look at Rambam's Hilchot Talmud Torah, he says, even though if we look back in the Torah, it's Shevet Levi is given the ones as the jobs of being the Torah teachers. Anybody is allowed today to, quote, be a Levi. That's what I think the kind of language the Rambam uses. So that, from that perspective, when we understand the bechora from that perspective, the bechora is not something that it means I'm the firstborn. It means I am the one who has the privilege of representing the family as the Kohen of the family. Okay, so given that's what Yaakov is looking to buy, we have to say, okay, and obviously Eisav is perfectly willing to sell. Why? Because he says, it's going to cause my death. Because why? because Yaakov tells him the following. By the way, you know that if you are the one doing the avodah and you do it wrong, for example, if you happen to be drunk when you do it, or you happen to be tamei when you do it, you are putting yourself in line for spiritually being cut off, karet, or mitabidei shamayim, or in certain cases, mitabidei adam, for different transgressions of the kahuna. So Eisav says, oh, really? Thanks. I don't want it. Thanks for telling me. I'm glad you told me. It's going to cause me to die. I'm not ready to accept this responsibility. So why Why do I want this job? Well, we would have thought he wanted it because the firstborn theoretically had the right of first refusal, because you go through each of the sons, and the first one should have gotten it. If he was declared ineligible or declared himself ineligible, then you went to the next son. Just like we know that in the laws of Yibum, if a brother dies and has no children, the wife is supposed to be taken in Yibum by the oldest of the brothers. And if the oldest is not ready or doesn't want to, then he can give that privilege over to any of the other brothers. But again, they have each one in age order has, quote, right of next refusal. So clearly, Yaakov is saying to Eisav, this is something I think I want. I really do want this. You don't attach any value to it. And he says that. He says, you're right. And that is why it's a very, very seemingly straightforward deal. There's no suggestion. Clearly, if Yaakov is an Ishtam, he clearly is not intending to, quote, swindle. I mean, think about it. The straightforward guy is swindling the guy who's the cunning guy. Does that make sense? No. Clearly, this is an open arms deal where both are perfectly willing to enter into the deal. Even though Eisav is later on going to say, he tricked me twice, he is entering this. He knows what he's selling. He knows what is involved, and he is perfectly willing to sell it. But that gives back to the word kayom. And I think kayom here, it's interesting because kayom does not mean hayom. It means like the day. And I suspect that Yaakov, in the word kayom, is trying to hint to Eisav something that we have a very similar passage when Moshe is talking to Korach. When Moshe is talking to Korach and he's trying to dissuade him from challenging Aaron, because now, once Aaron has been selected, that's it. That selection is final. There is no going back on that. Whereas up until that time, anyone could aspire to be a Kohen. That seems to be what's going on here. Yaakov, by birth, is not a Kohen. He's not a bechora. He has to wait until somebody else steps down, just like we have with Boaz. Boaz says to the other Goel, I know I'm a Goel, but you're higher priority. I can't step in until you step down. So Yaakov is saying the same thing to Eisav. I can't take this job until you step down. But similarly, we have when Moshe is trying to dissuade Korach, because now Aaron's already been selected. That's it. That's the final selection. It's done for the rest of history. Kohanim are now by birth only. It's not anymore by merit. It's the merit of Aaron HaKohen was enough to seal that for the rest of eternity. That Kohanim are Kohanim, and that's it. However, Moshe says to Korach, he says, Boker v'yodah Hashem et asher lo. And Rashi there brings the midrash that says, Moshe is saying to Korach, just like you can't make morning disappear, Hashem is the one who said when morning starts and when morning ends. You can't change that. So too, you can't change the fact that Aaron's already been chosen. I think Yaakov is hinting to Eisav exactly the opposite. Kayom, just like today is a day that we have the ability, we are still living in a time where anybody in the family can accept that role. Now you have to accept it or decline it. You're not living in a time later on where it's not going to be able to be moved. You're living in a time where it can be moved. So I'm giving you the offer I'll take your place if you really don't want it. And so that gives us a whole different picture of this interaction. When we understand that, again, if we think about it, Yaakov is Ishtam, and we have this, Yaakov is the patriarch. He's the one we look to for every one of his dealings. And as a matter of fact, not only is Yaakov Ishtam, we still say Titan Emet to Yaakov. Yaakov represents the midah of Emet, of truth, no matter what he does. So clearly, he is not trying to trick or deceive or swindle Eisav in any way.
But the because he doesn't give no brother comes dying, give him something to eat.
Okay.
Instead, he said, you want something? I want something too.
Okay. He
wants the lechem the zid adashim. I want the bechora.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, again, that you're saying there that this is a trade bechora from the zid adashim. I think that Yaakov here is being there's no question this is opportunistic. He's taking the opportunity when Eisav has. Again, the impression you get, and this is the impression I get. That's a very good question. But it says vayochal vayesh vayokom vayach. And the fact that it goes boom, 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 boom. Look at the trough. It's boom, 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 boom. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4. You go right through it because you get the impression that it's probably one of the first conversations these two have had together. That's the impression I get. Eisav is the guy. He's busy off here, off there, off running. And Yaakov says, hey, I got him now because he's hungry. He's going to sit here for a minute before he starts to eat. Now's the time to talk about this. It's something that, Yaakov didn't just suddenly come up with this idea out of, this is something obviously it's been on his mind. It's not something he suddenly out of whole cloth just says, hey, this is a great opportunity for me. No, he's saying, I've never had a chance to sit Eisav down and talk to him about this. I think now's a great chance. And that's perhaps why he holds back. It's not like, it says, he's tired and I'm hungry. But it's not like when the kids come in, any kid comes in anytime and I'm starved. Not starving. No, but right, but he's halech lamud is that's why I don't want the bechora, because the bechora is going to lead me to die. Okay, so again, yes, there are those that say Yaakov. There are those that want to be very critical of Yaakov and say, here Yaakov's taking advantage of Eisav. Absolutely. But I think, as I said, when we look at it a little deeper, we realize, and we have to understand, Yaakov is Ishtam. And the Torah describes him as such. He's not looking to, as I said, cheat, swindle, deceive, take advantage of Eisav. He is simply using this opportunity because he's got his attention, to have this discussion. Okay, Gershom.
It appears that Yaakov did not trust in what he said. How do we?
Because Yishavalo, absolutely.
Why would he fire Yishava if he trusted anything he said?
Again, that's a great question. Why the oath? It's interesting. Yaakov has the same thing. Yishavali is another place where Yaakov asks for an oath. He asks for an oath. In the case of Yosef and burial, he also asks for an oath. Why? I think there is probably a different reason. There he wants Yosef to have the oath in hand because Yaakov understands how important oaths are in the Egyptian world. Okay, here I think the oath is, you're sure you really mean it, or do you really mean it? And then I want you to take an oath, because otherwise he's saying, well, it's just nasmafta. It's just, okay, yeah, sure. Like we were playing a game and you said, sure, whatever you want in the game. The hishavalo means, I mean this for real. I'm not playing a game here. I mean this for real. Okay, I think that's the answer for the hishavalo. Not that he didn't trust him. He wanted Eisav to understand that this was a real deal, not a playing game deal. Okay, David. Sure.
Pesci said that Torah came not just status, it was responsibility.
Yes.
One of the responsibilities, household duty. Yaakov cooking a meal, and the parshat said, okay, take that, so we don't have to take that. But the fact is, Yaakov took the responsibility of preparing a meal, and Eisav comes in. He said, food, and Yaakov said, well, I have to prepare this meal. I'm really doing what you should be doing.
Okay, that's another approach. Yeah, I've seen that approach that wants to say that the bechora really was the one who ran the household, according to as David is saying. That's one opinion, is that the bechora's job was running the household. So that's also, as I said, all I'm trying to say is we look at this story one way when we learn it. We learn it as kids, and those images stay in our brains forever. And I'm just saying, there's a whole nother way to look at this story as we go through the Parshanim. And I hope that helps. Any other comments from out there in Zoom land? Because we had quite a few from the people in the room here. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you all. Again, I think there's a lot to unwrap here in this little short space of 6 psukim. And yet it's important for us because we say we're putting Yaakov as the equivalent to Avram and Yitzchak. So we would like to believe that he is Ishtar, he's completely upright in Yashar and all those other things we said. And so we want to give a more favorable spin to this whole story rather than that for already listening that we've had as kids. So I hope this helped. Hope we had some interesting interchange, and have a good evening and have a great week. If nobody else has any comments, I will say thank you all for joining and have a good evening. Oh, and Chodesh Tov. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Night, Rhoda.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, Jackie.